Layla was sitting on the edge of the bed, thoughtfully looking out the window, where the setting sun painted the sky with soft shades of orange and pink. She had long since stopped enjoying such little things. Sitting in her spacious, beautifully furnished bedroom, she felt only emptiness inside. It seemed that everything in her life was right and harmonious at first glance: a beautiful house, a successful husband, and a stable life, but a feeling of dissatisfaction was growing in her heart. Her husband, Jamal, was a man she always considered reliable and caring. He worked hard to provide them with a comfortable life. There had never been any money problems in their house, and at first glance one would have thought that their marriage was perfect. But Layla had long felt that something important had slipped away between them. Jamal was a successful, purposeful man, but there was a certain detachment behind his outward confidence. He was always busy, his work meetings lasted until late at night, and the phone rang almost non-stop. And even when he was at home, his attention was focused on business or social media. He was physically there, but mentally absent. Their conversations became more and more shallow, as if the real intimacy had disappeared. Layla used to enjoy every moment they spent together. Their romance began rapidly, and she was fascinated by his dedication, charisma, and self-confidence. He was a man who was respected by everyone around her, and she was proud to be his wife. However, this energy has faded over the years. Everything that used to seem so exciting has become routine. The love that once united them has turned into a habit, and the passion that made their hearts beat faster has disappeared. Layla felt more and more lonely, even when Jamal was around. She needed emotional intimacy, to be supported, understood, and talked to about intimate things. She didn't just want to hear her husband's voice, but to feel his presence, to be important to him. But Jamal seemed further away, as if his thoughts were in another place, in another world.
Jamal, I wanted to talk to you about us.
She said these words softly, almost in a whisper. When he returned from work late at night, tired as usual, she was standing at the kitchen table, watching him heat up the dinner she had cooked a few hours ago.
Has something happened? He answered without taking his eyes off the phone, looking through messages and reports.
It seems to me that we have somehow become estranged from each other. I feel like something important is disappearing between us.
Jamal put the phone down on the table and finally looked at her. He looked tired, as if these conversations were unpleasant to him. His face expressed neither interest nor emotion, only a businesslike calmness.
Layla, we are both adults. We have our responsibilities. You know that I work hard for our future. Maybe you just need to do something to distract yourself.
Those words were like a cold shower. Layla felt something tighten inside her. Her attempt to open up and share her feelings did not elicit the expected reaction. Instead, Jamal simply brushed off her worries, suggesting that she find something to occupy her time with, as if her feelings didn't matter. She didn't know what to say. The words stuck in my throat. Layla tried to explain her emotions in more detail, but it seemed to her that Jamal just didn't want to hear it. He went back to his phone, and went back to his phone, and went back to business, as if this conversation was of no importance to him. At night, Layla often lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how everything had changed. She recalled their first years together, those moments when their every look was filled with tenderness, when they could talk until morning, share their innermost thoughts. But now their conversations have become brief and superficial. Jamal didn't ask her questions about how her day had gone, and he wasn't interested in her thoughts or feelings. Her friends often said that such a stable and secure marriage was the dream of many women, that she was very lucky that her husband was successful and caring. But Layla knew that even the most beautiful exterior facades can hide emptiness. Day after day, she felt their bond weaken, and a longing for something real grew in her heart, for an intimacy that she no longer felt. Over time, Layla increasingly thought that she lacked deep emotional contact. She wanted to feel that she was being heard and understood, that she was important to her husband. But Jamal, although he was physically nearby, remained further away emotionally. Every day, Layla felt that they were becoming more and more strangers to each other. She sought solace in books, conversations with friends, but none of these activities brought her satisfaction. A feeling of anxiety and dissatisfaction was growing in Layla's soul. She began to think that maybe her marriage was a mistake, that maybe she married the wrong person who could make her happy in the long run. Over time, Layla began to notice that her thoughts were increasingly turning to what might be outside of this marriage. She didn't know what it would lead to, but she knew it couldn't go on like this. Her soul longed for something more, a real emotional intimacy that would give her back the feeling that she was alive, that she was loved and desired. Every time she tried to start a conversation with Jamal about her feelings, he either waved her off or turned the conversation to something else, as if he didn't want to delve into what his wife really cared about. Layla felt lonely even in the presence of her husband, and this gap between them was getting deeper. One day, sitting in a cafe with her friends, Layla realized that her story was similar to the stories of many other women. They talked about their marriages, how passion fades over the years, how men express their emotions less and less, and immerse themselves in work more and more. These conversations did not bring comfort to Layla, but only increased her feeling of loneliness. She understood that she had a choice to put up with this routine, or to look for something else that could fill her life with meaning and emotions. Layla began to think that maybe her life could have been different if she had allowed herself to go beyond the usual. But the fear of condemnation, of the possible consequences of this decision, held her back. As the days passed, Layla became more and more aware that her marriage to Jamal no longer brought her joy. She still respected him as a human being, but their bond was lost. It was like an old building that had cracked over time, and now there was no certainty that it could be restored. One evening, when Jamal was busy with his own affairs again, and Layla was sitting alone in the living room, she realized that she had to change something in her life. She didn't know what the next step would be, but she knew she couldn't stay in this emotional vacuum anymore. Her heart was looking for something else, something that could give her back a sense of joy and meaning. It was at this moment that Layla made the decision that she could no longer live the way she used to. Her life was empty, and she wanted to fill that void. One evening, Layla decided to take a walk around the city after a busy day. She needed solitude and the opportunity to distract herself from endless thoughts about marriage and her dissatisfaction. When she went outside, she felt the cool evening air envelop her, bringing with it some relief. Layla walked along familiar streets, reflecting that her life had become too predictable and boring. Her footsteps took her to the park, a small corner of tranquility in the center of the city. Layla loved this place, especially in the evening, when the silence and the light of the street lamps created an atmosphere of peace. She sat down on one of the benches and, closing her eyes, tried to let go of all her worries, at least for a moment. At that moment, she heard the soft creak of the bench next to her. Opening her eyes, Layla noticed an elderly man who sat down on a nearby bench. He was tall and stately, despite his age. His face was decorated with deep wrinkles, which indicated that he was a man who had lived a long and eventful life. His hair, once black, was now almost completely grey, and there was a wisdom in his eyes that only comes with age. He looked calm, and Layla immediately felt that this man was not like everyone else she had met. They were silent for several minutes, each enjoying the silence. Layla felt strangely calm in his presence, as if this man possessed some kind of magical ability to calm and pacify. This was exactly what she was missing.
"It's a beautiful evening, isn't it?"
he said in a low but deep voice, suddenly breaking the silence. Layla was surprised at how familiar this voice seemed to her, even though it was the first time she had heard it. She nodded, not knowing how best to respond.
Yes, sometimes such evenings seem almost perfect, she smiled, feeling that it was possible to talk openly with this man.
Samuel smiled back, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if he was enjoying this moment too.
"I often come here at this time. This place calms you down, helps you think about life."
His words penetrated Layla's soul. She felt that this man could understand her inner feelings, even though they had just met. She was drawn to him as a source capable of providing answers to her questions. Layla decided to continue the conversation, feeling that this could be an important moment in her life.
Yes, sometimes it seems that such moments are the only thing that helps to cope with thoughts, especially when there are too many of them.
Samuel looked at her carefully, as if he was examining her not only externally, but also internally. Layla felt that he understood her much better than anyone else in her life.
A lot of thoughts is good, but sometimes they can take us to a place where it gets too hard. You know, I've always believed that the best cure for difficult thoughts is talking to someone who's willing to listen.
His words seemed so simple, yet profound at the same time. Layla suddenly realized that this man could be the one to help her sort out the chaos that reigned in her head. She looked at him and decided she didn't want to miss this moment.
I think you're right. Sometimes it seems that there are so many questions inside, but no one who could help find the answers. Everyone is so busy with themselves and their problems.
Samuel nodded in agreement.
It's true. In a world where people are constantly running after something, you rarely find those who are willing to stop and just listen.
His words made Layla think again. She looked at Samuel and felt that in front of her was a man who had long since passed the path on which she was just beginning to wander. In his calmness and wisdom, she found what she had been looking for so long, a man who could not only listen, but also understand her on a deep level. The conversation between them continued. Layla talked about how she feels lonely in her marriage, that Jamal stopped paying attention to her a long time ago, and how she feels that their relationship has lost that emotional intimacy that was so important to her. Samuel did not interrupt, did not give advice, he just listened, and when necessary, gave short but accurate comments. With every word he said, Layla felt that she was opening up to him more and more. She was worried that this man, whom she had known for only a few hours, seemed closer to her than her own husband. The feeling was both frightening and comforting.
Layla, life often challenges us when we least expect it. There are times when we feel lost, but that doesn't mean we won't find our way again.
These words touched Layla to the depths of her soul. At that moment, she realized that Samuel wasn't just talking about life in general, but perhaps about herself. He was a man who did not offer simple solutions, but gave the feeling that anything is possible if you listen to your heart. They talked for a long time, and every minute Layla felt more and more that this man was able to understand her in a way that no one else could. Samuel was not young and energetic like her husband, but he had such inner strength and calmness that Layla felt protected next to him. She couldn't explain why she was attracted to this man, but with every word their bond grew stronger. It was much more than just talking to an older man. Layla felt that her life was changing right before her eyes. In the days that followed, she couldn't stop thinking about Samuel. His words, his voice, and his presence haunted her. She realized that she had found in him something that she had missed so much in her marriage to Jamal: emotional intimacy, understanding and support. Samuel became for her the one who gave her back the confidence and calmness that she so lacked in everyday life. Despite the significant age difference, Layla began to feel attracted to him, which was difficult to explain. It wasn't an ordinary attraction based on physical attraction. It was something deeper, a spiritual connection that turned out to be unexpected for her, but incredibly important. Every time they met again, they confirmed this feeling. Layla and Samuel spent a lot of time walking in the park or just talking about life. He told her about his past, about how he had lived a long life full of difficulties and joys. His stories were filled with wisdom that Layla couldn't find in her life. One day, when they were sitting on the same bench again, Layla realized that she was attracted to Samuel more and more. She felt that their meetings had become much more than just a way for her to spend time. She began to realize that this man had become for her the one who filled the void that her marriage had left. Layla could no longer deny that her feelings for Samuel were growing. She knew it was wrong, but she couldn't resist those emotions. Her heart was leading her in a completely different direction, and she could no longer ignore this call. After their first meeting in the park, Layla could no longer get rid of thoughts of Samuel. His calm voice, wise words, and the invisible comfort that he brought with his presence did not leave her mind. She realized that their meeting was more than just a casual conversation. Samuel became a kind of source of peace for her, which she had not felt in her marriage for a long time. Jamal, her husband, was still busy with work, immersed in business and his ambitions. Layla was getting further and further away from him. Her attempts to find an emotional connection with her husband finally failed, and she realized that this was not a temporary phenomenon, but rather an irretrievable loss. Every night, lying next to Jamal, she felt only a cold emptiness and loneliness. She thought about how her marriage had turned into a commitment devoid of meaning and emotion, and her life into a routine where every day was like the previous one. It was different with Samuel. Their conversations were filled with meaning and sincerity. Layla felt that with him she could be real, not hide her emotions and worries. Gradually their meetings became regular. At first, they just walked around the park, as in their first meeting, discussing life, the past and the future. Samuel shared his wisdom with her, telling her about the difficulties and joys of his long life, how he overcame losses, and how he found the strength to move forward. Layla, in turn, shared her thoughts about marriage, that she feels lost and lonely, despite an outwardly successful and prosperous life. Each of their meetings brought her a sense of peace and tranquility that she had not experienced for a long time. In Samuel, she found not just a companion, but a man who understood her on a deep level, as if he always knew what she needed. It was unlike her communication with Jamal, which turned into a formality where there was no place for frankness and sincerity. Gradually, Layla began to realize that her attraction to Samuel went beyond simple friendship. She began to feel more than just sympathy for him. It was hard to explain. Samuel was almost half a century older than her, but it didn't matter. His age, his appearance, his past, all these things faded into the background when she was with him. Layla felt that their bond went deeper than just physical attraction. It was something spiritual, something she couldn't explain in words. Each of their new meetings became a source of joy and comfort for her. Layla began to notice that she was looking forward to the moment when she could see Samuel again. She carefully planned her meetings with him, trying to make sure that Jamal did not suspect anything. These meetings became her little secret, her secret that she could not reveal to anyone. Layla was aware that what she was doing was wrong from the point of view of public morality. She cheated on her husband by dating another man, and even with someone who was much older than her. But every time she was with Samuel, those doubts and fears disappeared. Her affection for him was real, sincere, and she couldn't deny that feeling. In him, she found what she missed so much in her marriage: emotional intimacy, support, understanding. With Samuel, she didn't have to pretend or play a role. She could be herself, and it brought her incredible relief. Their meetings became more frequent. At first it was just walking and talking, but over time their relationship began to develop further. Layla felt that every time she saw Samuel, her heart began to beat faster. She couldn't explain why she was so attracted to him, but that attraction was getting stronger every day. Samuel felt that connection too. He knew that Layla was younger than him, that she had a husband, but he could not deny that something special had arisen between them. He saw Layla as a woman who needed the warmth and care she hadn't received in her marriage. He did not seek to have an affair with her, but he could not resist what he felt. Their relationship developed naturally, without coercion. Each of them knew that they were walking on thin ice, but no one wanted to retreat. Layla was beginning to realize that her relationship with Samuel wasn't just a temporary fling. It was something deeper than she could have imagined. In his eyes, she saw the wisdom that he had accumulated over his long life, and this wisdom attracted her. She didn't care about his age. His past. What mattered to her was that he gave her a sense of security and peace. She felt that she could be happy with him. But at the same time, Layla was gripped by fears. She understood that their affair would be met with condemnation from others. Society will never understand how a young woman could fall in love with an 80-year-old man. Her family, her friends, they will all be against this relationship. But every time she thought about it, her heart told her that she was on the right track. Samuel was the one who gave her everything she had been looking for so long. Secret meetings became a source of joy and meaning in Layla's life. She felt that her life was filled with emotions again, which she had missed so much in her marriage. Every time she left the house, leaving Jamal, she knew that she was going to a place where a real person was waiting for her, who understood her and accepted her for who she was. These meetings were her salvation from the emptiness that reigned in her marriage. Layla began to realize that her affair with Samuel was not just a way to get away from marital problems. It was more than that. Their bond was based on mutual respect, on an understanding of what each of them brings to the other's life. Samuel helped her see the world from a different perspective. He taught her to be patient and wise, and she gave him the feeling that life was not over yet, that he could still be important to someone. Gradually, Layla began to think that her marriage to Jamal was not something she wanted to keep. She understood that she could no longer live in such an emotional vacuum. Her heart belonged to Samuel, and she couldn't pretend that everything was okay anymore. Every day she spent with Jamal became more and more difficult for her, because she knew that her real life begins only when she meets Samuel. The secret affair between Layla and Samuel was getting more and more serious. They knew that their relationship would not be accepted by society, but that did not stop them. For them, the main thing was that they found in each other understanding, love and support, which they lacked so much in life. Layla began to make plans for the future, where she could be with Samuel openly, without hiding her feelings. She was scared to think that she would have to break up her marriage, but she understood that she could no longer live a lie. Her heart drew her to someone who truly understood and accepted her for who she was. Layla was sitting on her bed, lost in her thoughts, her gaze fixed on a single point on the wall. A storm was raging inside her. Her inner world was full of contradictions that seemed to tear her apart. On the one hand, she knew that she had betrayed her husband, Jamal. On the other hand, her heart was with Samuel, who became for her not only a comfort, but also a source of real emotions, which she had not felt in marriage for a long time. She couldn't ignore her feelings anymore, but she also couldn't deny feeling guilty that her life had become so confusing. Every morning, waking up next to Jamal, Layla felt her inner struggle getting sharper. Jamal remained the same man she had known for many years, a successful, caring and responsible husband. He didn't deserve to be betrayed. He was a man who always tried to provide her with a comfortable and stable life. But it was this stability that now weighed on her like an unbearable burden. Their marriage turned into a routine devoid of passion and emotional intimacy. Everything they had seemed to be an artificially maintained illusion. Layla often recalled their first years together. It was different then. Their romance was full of passion and energy, and their relationship was filled with conversation and laughter. But over time, Jamal immersed himself in his work, his attention shifted to his career, and he stopped being the person with whom Layla could share her thoughts and feelings. Jamal was no longer the one who listened to her and supported her. Instead, he became a figure in her life, existing in parallel, but not with her. Now that Samuel had appeared in her life, Layla couldn't help but compare the two men. Samuel, although much older, was for her the one who gave her the understanding she had been looking for so long. Every time they talked, Layla felt that he was seeing her for real, not just the young wife of a successful man, but a woman in need of emotional support and care. He listened to her without rushing to give advice. He understood her without judging her. There was a depth to him that attracted her more and more. This connection with Samuel was something unexpected for Layla. She hadn't planned on falling in love with a man who was almost half a century older than her. It was strange, incomprehensible, but at the same time completely natural. Her attraction to him was not based on physical attractiveness or youthful passion. It was a mature, meaningful attachment in which she found what she had missed so much in her marriage. However, guilt continued to haunt her. Layla couldn't get rid of the thought that she had betrayed Jamal. Every time she looked at him, her soul was torn apart by the knowledge that she was no longer the woman she had been at the beginning of their marriage. She had changed, and now her heart belonged to another person. But how could she leave her husband, who had always been faithful and caring to her? How to explain to him that her love for him has faded, and her heart is now drawn to a man whom society would consider an inappropriate choice? The internal conflict was bothering her. Layla tried to find an excuse for her actions, but each of her explanations sounded weak and insufficient. She knew that following her feelings was not always easy, especially when it went against social norms and moral obligations. Society expects her to remain faithful to her husband, that her duty is to be his support. But what if she herself needs support and understanding that he can no longer give her? She often asked herself the question, which is more important, to follow what is considered right, or to listen to your heart, even if it leads to the destruction of your former life? Layla knew that her relationship with Samuel would never be accepted by society. People won't understand how a young woman could fall in love with an 80-year-old man. She was afraid of being judged, but she was even more afraid of losing the emotional connection she had found with Samuel. On the days when Layla couldn't date Samuel, she felt lost. Jamal was there, but his presence brought her no comfort. He continued to live his usual life, not noticing the changes in Layla. She had already thought more than once that maybe he wouldn't even notice if she left. Their marriage existed as a habit, as a matter of course. But Layla knew she couldn't live like this anymore. She began to avoid talking to Jamal about her feelings. Every time he asked her what was wrong with her, she brushed it off, trying not to delve into her feelings. Layla knew that if she started talking about what was going on inside her, it would lead to the destruction of their marriage. And although she still wasn't ready for it, she already felt that the end was near. The guilt that haunted her every morning when she woke up next to Jamal was gradually receding into the background. Layla became more and more convinced that her love for Samuel was real. It wasn't just a temporary infatuation or a way to get away from marital problems. It was a deep, sincere affection that brought her happiness and peace. She knew that her attraction to Samuel wasn't something superficial, but something she couldn't ignore. Layla felt she had to make a choice. She couldn't stay in limbo anymore, torn between two men. Every time she met Samuel, her confidence that their love was the right choice grew stronger. But every time she returned home to Jamal, she was overcome with guilt and fear of what she had to do. Her mind told her that staying with Jamal was the logical and right choice. He was her husband, they had been married for several years, and despite the problems, their marriage was still solid in terms of external well-being. But Layla's heart was going in a different direction. She knew she couldn't ignore her feelings anymore. Her attraction to Samuel was too strong to give up on him. One such evening, as Layla sat alone, thinking about her future, she realized that she could no longer continue to live a lie. Her inner conflict had reached its climax. She knew that sooner or later she would have to make a decision. Either she stays married for the sake of social norms and expectations, or she chooses her happiness and love, despite all the difficulties and condemnation that can await her. Layla knew that this choice would change her life forever. She could no longer return to her former life, where she was Jamal's wife and followed the rules dictated by society. Now her choice was either to stay true to her external commitments or to follow her heart, which already belonged to Samuel. This moment of realization was both frightening and liberating for her. Layla realized that she could no longer live in compromise with herself. Her feelings for Samuel were real, and she couldn't ignore them for the sake of maintaining a semblance of normality. Her love for him became a source of strength for her, which helped her move forward despite all her fears and doubts. Now that she had made her decision, Layla felt that her inner conflict had begun to subside. She knew that a difficult path awaited her, but she was ready to go through it. Samuel was the one who gave her a sense of meaning and joy, and she couldn't give it up for the sake of social norms. Layla had been preparing for the day when she would have to tell Jamal the truth for a long time. Months of internal conflict had led her to the point where she could no longer live a lie. Every day, when she woke up next to her husband, she was tormented by guilt, which tormented her more and more. Samuel was the one who gave her everything she needed in her marriage to Jamal: emotional intimacy, support and real understanding. But every day, hiding her affair, she felt her conscience pressing down harder. She knew that the breakup would be painful for Jamal. Despite their distance from each other, he remained a man who tried to provide her with a decent life. He did not know that Layla had long ago stopped feeling the connection with him that she had before. He was immersed in his work, in his affairs, and did not even notice how her heart began to go away. For him, their lives remained the same, stable and predictable, and he did not suspect that such a deep internal upheaval was taking place in Layla. The evening came when Layla decided that she couldn't put this conversation off any longer. Internally, she had already made a decision. She knew that their marriage couldn't go on, that she couldn't stay with a man she no longer loved the way she once did. But it was even more difficult to admit that her heart now belongs to someone else, an older man with whom she found something that was not in her marriage. Jamal returned home from work late, as usual, and Layla was already sitting on the couch in the living room, waiting for him. She tried to find the right words, but there were none. How can you explain what has already happened without destroying everything at once? She saw her husband take off his jacket, put his briefcase on a chair, unaware that in a few minutes his life would change forever. When he sat down at the table to have dinner, Layla took a deep breath. She knew there was no turning back, that once she decided to tell the truth, this was the moment that would change their relationship forever. Her heart was racing, her thoughts were confused, but she couldn't back down anymore. Her love for Samuel had become too important for her to live on in a marriage that had long since lost its meaning. Jamal, sitting at the table, noticed her tension. He asked if everything was okay, to which Layla nodded, although her face said otherwise. She couldn't hide her condition anymore. She walked over to the table, sat down opposite, and started talking. She admitted that she could no longer continue to live the way she used to. At first, her words were cautious, but soon she told everything about how she felt lonely in their marriage, how her heart began to reach out to Samuel, and how this novel became a salvation for her from inner emptiness. Jamal listened to her in silence at first. His face gradually changed from calm to stunned. Layla could see his gaze getting heavier and heavier. He hadn't expected this turn of events. He couldn't believe that his wife, with whom he had lived for so many years, had betrayed him in this way. He was always confident in their marriage, despite the fact that their relationship had changed. For him, it was a blow that he did not expect. When Layla told him that she had fallen in love with Samuel, Jamal couldn't contain his anger. He knew this man, had seen him several times at various events, but even in his wildest dreams he could not imagine that Layla had started an affair with a man who was almost half a century older than her. He didn't understand how this could happen, what she saw in this elderly man. It hurt him not only because of the betrayal, but also because of the realization that his wife had chosen someone who, in his opinion, was completely unsuitable for her. Jamal tried to figure out where he had made a mistake. He asked her what he had done wrong, why she had stopped loving him. Layla, feeling that Jamal's words were punching a hole in her own confidence, tried to explain that it was not about him as a person, but that their marriage had long lost the emotional connection that was important to her. But Jamal didn't want to hear it. For him, treason was a betrayal that he could not forgive. Layla saw his face contort in pain. She didn't want to hurt him, but she knew she couldn't hide the truth anymore. This moment became the last point for her, beyond which there was no return. She saw their marriage crumbling before her eyes, but at the same time she felt that she was making the right choice. Her feelings for Samuel were real, and she couldn't live a lie anymore. Jamal sat in silence for a long time, lost in his thoughts. He didn't know what to say. Everything he had built in his life collapsed in an instant. He couldn't understand how this could happen. He always thought that their marriage was solid, that they were a happy couple. But now Layla was sitting in front of him and telling him that she no longer loved him and that her heart belonged to someone else. After a long pause, Jamal finally got up and told Layla that she needed to leave. He couldn't see her anymore, knowing that she had betrayed him. He was full of anger and pain, and Layla knew that this moment had destroyed everything they had. She packed her things in silence, feeling the weight of what was happening, but at the same time, her heart felt strangely relieved. She knew that there was no need to hide the truth anymore, no need to live a lie anymore. When Layla left the house, she felt the cold night air on her face. Her heart was heavy, but at the same time she felt that she had made the right choice. Now she could be with Samuel openly, without hiding or pretending. Her life had changed forever, and although this breakup was painful for both of them, she understood that it could not have been otherwise. Layla knew that difficulties were ahead of her. Society, family, friends, they would all condemn her for going to an older man, but her heart was calm. Her love for Samuel was real, and now that she was no longer bound by obligations to Jamal, she could be with someone who really understood her. This breakup destroyed her marriage, but at the same time gave her freedom. Layla started a new life in which she no longer had to pretend and hide her feelings. Now she could build a relationship with Samuel, knowing that it was her choice and that she made it consciously. After the painful breakup with Jamal, Layla felt both devastated and liberated. It was like breaking out of a cage she had been in for a long time, but at the same time she had to realize the severity of the changes. Having left stability and a familiar life behind, Layla knew that difficulties were ahead of her, but this did not frighten her as much as before. Now she could follow her heart instead of social norms. The first days after the breakup were in chaos. Layla has not yet fully realized how much her life has changed. She was no longer bound by obligations, but this release did not bring her instant happiness. She needed time to adjust to the new reality. She often thought about how to build her life further, because her choice was unusual and in many ways contradicted the expectations of others. Samuel was there, as always. His calmness and confidence were like an anchor for Layla, who felt lost in a storm of emotions. He did not condemn her for leaving her husband for him, and did not ask unnecessary questions. Samuel understood that Layla needed time to find inner balance, and he was ready to wait. He knew that their path would not be easy, but his love for Layla was so strong that he was ready to accept any difficulties. Their relationship began to develop on a new level. Layla no longer felt torn between two lives. Now she could devote herself completely to this relationship without looking back or feeling remorse. She felt more open and free around Samuel, who was the kind of person she could be real with. He was not only her lover, but also her friend, mentor and support. Despite the inner peace she found with Samuel, Layla understood that others would condemn their choice. Their age difference, almost 50 years, was too significant to go unnoticed. The glances of people on the street, the oblique remarks of acquaintances, conversations behind their backs, all this Layla understood was inevitable. She couldn't avoid public pressure, but she tried not to attach much importance to it. People around often couldn't understand how a young woman could fall in love with a man who was almost twice her age. Samuel looked like an old man, although he retained a clear mind and fortitude. This was unacceptable to others, and many tried not to hide their indignation. Even Layla's friends and family did not understand her choice. Some tried to dissuade her, believing that she was just going through a difficult period in her life, that these were not real feelings but only an escape from problems. But Layla knew that their love was real. She saw in Samuel not just an elderly man, but a soul who was close to her in spirit. His age didn't matter when it was just the two of them. Every conversation they had was filled with meaning. Every meeting brought her the feeling that she was finding something in him that had never been in her previous relationship. Over time, Layla began to notice that the condemnation from others no longer had such a strong influence on her as before. She learned to ignore the opinions of those who did not understand her. Her world had narrowed down to Samuel, and it was a world in which she felt truly happy. Their relationship has become something much deeper than just a romance between two people. Samuel, despite his restraint, turned out to be a surprisingly empathetic partner. He always knew how to support Layla in difficult moments, how to help her find the strength to move forward. His life experience and wisdom became a source of inspiration for Layla. She was often surprised at how deep their conversations were, and how they could discuss any topic, from the simplest everyday issues to philosophical reflections on life and death. They began to arrange their life together. Layla moved in with Samuel, and they began to create their own home. Although their living conditions were modest, they were both happy with what they had. They didn't need luxury. The main thing for them was that they were together. They spent every evening together, discussing plans for the future, sharing their thoughts and feelings. Layla began to find joy in this life, which she had not experienced for a long time. She no longer felt lonely or lost. Her life had finally found the meaning she was looking for. Together with Samuel, she began to see the world differently. She no longer sought to meet the expectations of society. Her only criterion of happiness now was her own inner sense of peace and contentment. Despite the age difference, their relationship was harmonious. Layla felt protected next to Samuel, and he, in turn, gained a second youth next to her. Their relationship became for him a source of joy and a new meaning to life. He knew that maybe their future wouldn't be long, but it didn't matter. The important thing was that every day they spent together brought them happiness. Layla often reflected on how her world had changed. Until recently, she was a married woman living in a marriage where there was no place for emotional intimacy. Now she was living with a man who was almost half a century older than her, but with whom she felt truly alive. She was no longer afraid of being judged, no longer felt guilty about her choice. Her love for Samuel was stronger than any prejudice, and that was the main thing. They began to make plans for the future. Of course, their plans were more restrained than those of young couples. They didn't think about the long term, they didn't build large-scale projects. But every day they spent together was valuable to them. They planned trips, even small ones, to see new places and spend time together. It didn't matter to them where they were. The main thing was that they were together. Their home became a place of peace and quiet. Layla often noticed how she learned to appreciate the simple joys of life: morning coffee, walks in the park together, evening conversations by the fireplace. These moments became a source of inspiration and happiness for her. She no longer aspired to conform to any ideals or expectations. Her life was simple, but full of meaning. Samuel taught Layla to be patient, wise and balanced. He helped her see the world in calmer tones, not to get hung up on the little things, and not worry about what she couldn't change. Layla, in turn, brought joy and light to his life. She gave him the feeling that his life was not over, that he was still important and needed. Over time, even the most ardent critics began to realize that Layla and Samuel really found their happiness in each other. Their love became so obvious and sincere that even those who condemned them at first began to soften. They saw that their relationship was not based on a temporary infatuation or an escape from problems, but was a real, deep bond between two people. Layla and Samuel overcame all prejudices and expectations. They found harmony in their relationship, despite all the difficulties and differences. Their love became stronger than anything that could separate them. Now that they were together, they felt they could overcome any obstacles,